ACMI would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands and waterways of Greater Melbourne, the people of the Kulin Nation, and recognise that ACMI is located on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. We also acknowledge First Nations people as the original storytellers of this land, and recognise their significant contribution to the contemporary moving image.
Hello and welcome, people in person. Thank you for coming to ACMI tonight, and for everyone online listening to this inaugural AMaGA address. Tonight's address is by Seb Chan, outgoing AMaGA National President and Director and CEO of ACMI. Given we didn't have a national conference this year, we thought we'd take the opportunity to hear from the outgoing president of the National Association about the sector, about what the headwinds are that face museums and galleries in Australia, but also internationally, coming at the issues from not only his perspective of his time on National Council, but also through his work, his career, and his leadership here at ACMI, which actually came into being while he was AMaGA president. And I'd like to acknowledge that challenge that Seb, of course, rose to. But it was a difficult time, and I know that it caused some, consternation around whether the juggle could occur. And look, everyone should be incredibly grateful, I certainly was, that Seb decided to stay on for a second term in his presidency. That is now has to come to an end tonight. I don't want to take up too much time because we've got a panel discussion later and an opportunity for everyone to ask questions. But I would like to say that I think the first of these talks is going to be the start of a great tradition for AMaGA. Hopefully, each one ever after will be within a national conference. I can't say how assured we've been by the national membership that that's a very important value proposition of this organisation, if not the paramount value proposition that AMaGA presents. But before I'm going to stop talking in management speak and speak personally about offering my thanks to Seb for what's been an amazing time for us as an organisation. Seb came in 2021. We were still dealing with the pandemic, the Canberra conference in 2021. Everyone who remembers, who was involved in the organisation, knows that it was postponed from 2020. We had it in June 2021. Seb unfortunately couldn't join us for his first conference and council meeting because Melbourne had just suddenly got locked down the day before, and then that started the major lockdowns in Victoria that went after that. So that was the beginning of Seb's presidency. But despite that, as soon as from the first phone call, Seb and I got on really well. We were able to talk frankly. We spoke every fortnight throughout these 4 years, and that's been incredible for me. I've felt mentored and supported as the CEO of an organisation, as someone who'd never done that job before either. I was a baby CEO. I'd come in 3 months before Seb arrived as president, and I'd come from working in a major institution running a department. So I had a finance department to draw on, I had HR, I had all the things, and then I came to AMaGA and had to learn from scratch how to do what AMaGA needs to do. And it's been 5 years. I think I'm getting my hands around it, but Seb has been instrumental and instructive throughout that, and I want to thank you sincerely for that support, and that I extend that thanks from all of the National Council and the branch presidents as well. So you've got a blurb about what Seb's going to talk about, but in ending my thanks to Seb, I just want to say, please don't be a stranger. Please keep sending me those articles about, crazy happenings in the world of museums and otherwise. let's continue our debate about what an art museum and what is and what it isn't, because if you notice on your Google Maps, this museum is an art museum. So we will continue to have that discussion, I hope, and it's going to stay robust for very, very long. The other thing I'd like to say to you, Seb, is that you can't really leave, because I see AMaGA as the Hotel California of employers. You can check out, but you can never leave. But before you leave, I'd like you to give a lecture. So please join me in welcoming Seb Chan.
Thanks, heaps, eh? Thanks a lot, Katie. That's very kind. So, hi, I'm literally just back from China. I got back yesterday morning, so I thought I'd reuse the intro slide. I was speaking at the Palace Museum Centennial Gathering, and I was struck by their intense focus on digitisation and their open kindness to share not only their collections, but also their methods. There was a confidence about the value of their national purpose and the way they spoke about that, which felt very different to the way we speak about things here in Australia, which I think speaks to some of our national certainty about our identity, where we've come from and where we're heading. The Chinese also used the word civilizations a lot, which I will remember with a smirk. Civilizations plural, I should add. So when former President Robin Hurst first convinced me to put myself forward for the presidency of AMaGA back in mid-2022, I was not yet a museum director, and by the time the AGM came around, though, I'd been appointed director and CEO here at the Australian Centre for the Moving Image, and there are pros and cons to being a museum director at any time in your life or world, maybe. But I think those of us who've been charged with leading a museum and taking part in nudging our sector forward in new ways, the years following the pandemic have, let's say, been interesting. My first memories of a museum visit would date back to Christmas 1983. Apart from the memories of being caught up and separated from my parents during the Harrods bombing, I was playing games in the computer games section, which if you visited Game World below, you would see a photo of me from that 1983 with my Dungeons and Dragons book underneath my arm, posing for a family portrait, apparently to show that we were a scholarly family. So I sort of was playing games in the computer game section of Harrods at the height of the Spectrum and Commodore 64 boom. My dad actually opened one of the doors as the car bomb went off and was pushed back in to the store by the blast. We were all fine, but we were separated for a couple of hours. The other big memory of the trip was the holograms exhibition at the Science Museum called Light Dimensions. I bought a holographic Tutankhamun with my pocket money. I think it's buried somewhere in my garage with my childhood things. But even then, museum shops were an important part of the things that made museums memorable to people. And we know from kind of the research that more people than ever visit museums now, certainly many more than in 1983. And when I was in China, one of the speakers from the British Museum was saying that nearly 50% of their visitation is now Chinese tourists. And we asked, well, why is that? And it was because the British and the notion of the Summer Palace played such a key role in Chinese history and identity that it was a pilgrimage to visit the British Museum. So many more people visiting museums and galleries now, but it's at the same time as the sector we find it harder kind of than ever before. So I've kind of worked in museums now for a quarter of a century, actually a bit more than that, literally. I started out in technology before becoming a museum director, which gives me a slightly different perspective to other directors in museums, because I have designed, built and maintained technology for museums for a very long time. Having worked so closely with digital media technologies, I know that despite all their promises, they do not work as reliably or predictably as promised. The error and the glitch is part of the grain of digital media, and those inflated promises are part of the financing model. When I started my career in museums, we were just beginning to build websites and digitize things. This is a photo from the Powerhouse where I was working. This is probably circa about 2003, and this is doing a very early laser scan of a 3D object. We argued a lot about the value of websites, the value of digitization. We spent a huge amount of time and money scanning and making our collections available on the web. We worried a lot about the resolution of images and whether sharing what we would now call smaller than phone-sized images would affect the revenue of our loss-making image libraries. Quickly though, we realised the most difficult part was actually the research and documentation, not actually the taking of photos. More images did not actually make a collection more useful. One thing we learned in the early days was that the more we digitised and shared, the greater the demand to see it in person and to know more about it. And also the more the public wanted to tell us about our own collections, especially within the social sciences. So whilst we could scale and automate digitisation, we could not scale curatorial research or fact checking. Digital technologies, of course, in the last 25 years have let us zoom in closer and zoom out wider. They let us pull apart, reassemble and remix. They let us analyse and explore and make connections in new ways. And through digitisation, they make the physical malleable and plastic. But the way in which the interfaces have developed and the use of collaborative filtering have given rise to a sense of flattening and dehistoricization. This continues with modern LLMs or large language models and generative AI tools. And research is already showing that the public has difficulty picking the genuine from the generated image. And in some circumstances, they might even prefer the generated to the original. This is not a positive development for museums who are concerned with preserving evidence of the past. All technologies have cultural and social impacts, and these technologies that have changed our lives have also changed our society and our sector. This isn't new from electricity, the internet, computation, the web, smartphones and LLMs. We're also living in a time where evidence doesn't seem to matter. There are no consequences for wide-scale fraud, to climate inaction, to war or to genocide, and thus repositories of evidence, museums and archives are actually being directly challenged. This unfortunate cultural response seems to have devolved to a cynical nihilism, which of course makes everything even worse. When I worked for the Smithsonian, rebuilding and reinventing the Cooper Hewitt, we wanted visitors to care about design and to make sense of the things they were seeing. We also wanted younger visitors to think of themselves as potential designers, to consider careers in design, to form an appreciation of craft. With a historical collection as well as a contemporary one, we wanted visitors to make connections across time and to notice patterns and reoccurring themes. To do that, we knew we needed to pique kind of visitors' curiosity and get them off kind of their kind of phones. We wanted them to record and share kind of their kind of visit, but to also look at the real objects in kind of the museum, not only through the camera lens and screens of their phones, but most of all though, we wanted them to talk to each other. It changed what kind of visitors expected of kind of the museum. It surprised people, and it surprised people within our sector too. The importance of friction, surprise, and its effect on kind of memory. Sometimes I feel that our sector has lost its way, but then I travel and realise it doesn't kind of need kind of to be this way. Or I speak to younger museum workers or my own front of house staff and kind of volunteers, and realise we have an amazing sector, and the people who work in it are really incredible, and that we do have the ability to make kind of things different. So I've skipped really fast through this. This was going to be like longer. So I'm gonna. So I have these 6 things for the future. I thought I'd end up with these six ideas for the future based on what I've come to learn during my time as the president of AMaGA, and some of these may be a surprise for those who know me. So 1. We need alliances to rebuild the humanities and also the museum sector. We need broad-based alliances that can kind of stand differences of opinion. We need to assert the vital role in kind of research that kind of museums play. Without kind of this, we all suffer. AMaGA needs to work with CAMD, ICOM, and many other sector orgs, and also organisations beyond our sector. Within our sector, research has been downgraded. It has been replaced by a desire for greater tourism visitors and a vague sense in some institutions of a greater focus on, in quotes, supporting artists and creators. But this doesn't actually differentiate museums in the longer term. We just become entertainment, and there are many other competitors within the entertainment sector. 2, we used to be leaders in museum practices. During kind of the 1980s and 1990s with the new museology, as it was called, and then in the 1990s and 2000s with digital and technologies. We've also been leaders in many other subfields of museums too. But this is really hard when kind of when revenue is scarce. Training the next kind of generation of workers needs to be a focus. Museum work is real labour, and it needs new alliances. 3. I'm really going through this really fast. So we're going to have more time for, discursive dialogue and those things. So there's a huge issue around being audience focused without also making sure that in so being audience focused, there is a new social contract that is explicitly developed between those new audiences and the broader idea of publicly funded culture. Not only as in quotes fans of a culture brand, which it might be argued many kind of large institutions have been encouraged to become by their boards and representatives of consulting firms. There was a great exhibition at the V&A in 2015 which had this in the foyer. Being audience focused without explicitly calling out a social contract, without calling out the social contract, you own this is actually yours, leads further down the path of corporatisation and user pays. And of course it is about who pays if it isn't the actual user. Philanthropy, when it is disconnected from a social contract, is not kind of sustainable either. And I'm surprised that we need to say this, but there was a long period of time where the broad value of culture was not assessed in purely economic terms. But we need to keep saying that and remind people that that isn't normal. 4, shared infrastructure is the only way through this, not megalithic new buildings that were conceived in business cases in a different era. Long ago, Richard Florida's ideas were debunked in urban kind of studies. They date from decades ago. We're in an ecology, and we need kind of to support the forest floor and the mushroom layer, not only the megaflora and megafauna. The forest floor is where all of the good things happen, and not only in cities but in the kind of regions too. There needs to be an intentional web of culture built across the nation, and we need to be making the case that museums work, not kind of that they are kind of broken. And at the same time, we do need to work better together to collectively fix some of our own issues. 5. The sector has done really good work over the past decades in access and impact. But as our society and demographics continue to diversify, this is continuous work. Larger visitation numbers do not necessarily equate to real success. One of the things I'm most proud of the work we do here is the results of our daily visitor surveying, 364 days a year, and 5,000 plus surveys a year, maybe 10,000 this year, which amongst many other things measure performance against what we call our experience principles. We have 3 experience principles. For me as Director and CEO, the figures on this slide are astonishingly high. These principles affect the perception of our brand and what we can do with that, and the impact that our museum has on visitors. We change visitors' perception not only of this museum, but of the things and experiences they might expect from other museums within our sector and of our subject matter. This work makes a huge difference, and I would love that more museums shared their methodologies of coming to terms with impact. 6, and this is the final one. I can't believe this. Volunteering. Volunteering and showing up really matters. None of this works without volunteers. This is much easier when we have a strong social contract, and AMaGA and most of our kind of museums runs almost entirely on the labour of kind of volunteers. We should never forget this. Thank you. Now let's chat. So we have a long time for a chat, because I did tell Katie I'd probably do 40 minutes, and I've done 16 minutes and 57 seconds. But I would say that hopefully that has triggered some contestation, and now we can have a chat. So I think Katie and Craig and Julie, we're all going to have a conversation now.
I've had a career in public programming.
Is this thing on?
Yes, it is, Seb. So I think for the rest of the time we have together, certainly I will ask a few prompting questions from the panellists around certainly your 6 points that are really, there's so much to unpack in those, and I'm sure people in the audience have questions to address that might touch on all of those themes. I've got a few others I'd like to, a few other points or questions I'd like to tease out around, the uniqueness of this particular council group and this particular executive you've got in front of you, who are working at once in museums while advocating for the sector as a whole and the challenges of that, but also the synergies that come from that. But I suppose maybe we can start there, but the directed and the formal part of the questions and my chat with the panel won't go for that long. We will then go to audience questions to take this final opportunity to have these fantastic people here as a group and share their insights. Okay, so I think I'll start with that question and maybe direct it in the first instance at Julie and Seb. So how have you managed over these 4 years? And Seb, you started way back in 2021. It wasn't 2022. So
really? Oh, yeah, it was, wasn't it? Yeah. I forgot about that Canberra incident.
Yes, the Canberra
I blocked that whole year out.
You locked it out.
I locked it out. I did. I've been scarred by that.
Been locked out. No. Yep, locked
down. Because actually then when I came to the Perth one,
you got sick.
I thought I got COVID and I didn't want to get locked in.
That's when you became
I had to leave after the first morning because I thought I was going to get trapped in Perth.
Yeah.
I didn't want that.
Well, nobody wanted that.
But he was presidential despite being physically absent.
Sick.
But
anyway.
Julie needed to step up there. So I think this is a broader question that we're tackling at AMaGA in general around governance, in terms of if the leadership are very well occupied in doing their day jobs, what can we reasonably expect as a sector that they can do?
I think that was a really hard thing. I think, AMaGA's shifted into a period where the executive and the National Council are all mid-career professionals who are very busy and also sometimes have constraints around what they can and cannot say publicly. And there's a lot of, I think, challenges around and opportunities around what that creates. And I think the great opportunity is that it does give AMaGA the ability to influence policy, both the federal and state level, using the influence and positions that the National Council hold. There are complexities with that, particularly for those who work in the federal institutions. But I think one of the things that's been really fantastic over this period has been, one of the things I'm most proud of is that we were able to have 2 regional national conferences, and that Julie takes over with as a regional national president, because I think that really does change the way AMaGA is perceived and what it is seen to be representing. The challenge of that is how does AMaGA continue to have voice in what still remain rather East Coast centric discussions about the directions of things. I think that's one of the challenges going forward. I think hearing what's actually coming from museum workers in the places where you work has also been really valuable. And I think particularly this period coming out of COVID too, where the economic bubble has been deflated at different speeds, let's say in different jurisdictions, but actually being close to the real issues around labour and now also labour replacement with AI is something that's very important, and I think makes AMaGA the opportunity for AMaGA to be closer to a union of museum workers in a collective sense. Julie.
Yeah, and that was always my perception of AMaGA. I never actually felt like I had an option to participate in AMaGA. I felt like it was something that you had to do. And I think the the way the organisation was embedded in my regional institution, like literally it was in my position description that I had to be in AMaGA. And so creating that environment, and now, when you're talking about younger museum workers, like most of the workers in my organisation, well, at least probably about 60%, I could have given birth to. And so it's this constant change and looking at the evolution, and things that when I started in museums were radical. Like, I'm exactly the same person as when I started in museums 35 years ago, and I'm saying the same things, but now I'm like sweet. And then it was really, it was scary. It was like considered really radical. And so I think that I'm quite lucky that I've convinced my political bosses that this is what people do. Newcastle has done this for so long, they think this is normal. And so now I've got team members that are on New South Wales branch staff, they're on working together to do Hunter chapter, which, chapters used to be quite big, and our chapter still continues strength. But I guess, and when people have been asking me about this today, I've honestly been saying, well, I'm really terrified. And I think people think that I'm being like self-depreciating and that kind of stuff. But what I'm actually afraid of is the industry. So at its core, there is still an us versus them. There's still a hierarchical thing. There's an assumption, and I've actually been told, well, you'll get lots of experience in a region, so when you get a real museum job, you'll know how to do it. And so, I feel like I'm still kind of like kicking against the pricks to have people acknowledge that, half of our industry is regional, is remote, and they're not regional and remote because they can't work in a big, institution. Often it's because we choose to, because we can make change in the corners when no one sees it. We can do radical things because people aren't noticing. And so often I find that when I'm in a grant assessing or an award assessing or standards or something like that, people constantly refer to local government institutions doing well with a level of surprise. And I guess from my perspective, that's what I'm scared of. I'm scared of that fight that we have to do, and I guess what we've learnt and what we see, the things that I get inspired by and that make me want to do the work that I do are often things that are happening in the corners that no one is noticing. And so, yeah, that I guess is, I don't know why I didn't think that I would have an option. I put up my hand in 21 and was really nervous about running for council because I thought, oh, well, no one will vote for me, right? And then became the vice president and then just went, oh, my goodness. And was then surprised to get presidency. But I was nominated by regionals. And I was encouraged by regionals. So I think they're tough cookies. So I feel a profound sense of humility that I'm here on this stage doing this thing that I'm doing, and that I get to work in a way that creates identity and belonging and ownership for my multiple communities that use our space, and that I can adjust quickly and I can break rules. And for me, still museum work is a do-it-yourself punk rock thing to do.
So it's interesting that, I think people do, one of the stories that, I often tell is when our then new Minister for Creative Industries here in Victoria my minister, Minister Brooks, started his very first day. He came and was the official at the AMaGA Vic Awards, which was hosted up here in one of our cinemas. And we thought, you know, Ash and I thought Minister Brooks would stay for, 15 minutes, do his welcome and then leave. He stayed for the entire event, several hours, and he was so engaged, and he remembered quite a few of the awardees from his time as Multicultural Affairs Minister. And it was really interesting that I think museums' interesting practice is of interest to others, even when they are new. Minister Brooks was, I think he would have said that he was surprised that this was what his new portfolio involved, but he was really excited by it. And I think that was really good, and I think that bears out in some of the good work that's going on here in Victoria. But I think it's interesting that sort of sometimes it's how the sector presents the work to others, and I think that's the power of AMaGA in highlighting some of the really great work that gets done. And Australia, as I said, has been doing great work for a long, long time, but I would say that there is a need for us to recognise and remember that it's for the sector, not just one institution, and that's sort of where I think the post-pandemic pieces sometimes pits the large versus the small, the city versus the regions, and the institutions versus each other, which of course doesn't help us grow the pie or even make a case of the impact we have across communities in ways that are not just more tourism night sales and those sorts of things, which are important. I don't want to say they're not important, but I think for a lot of the discussions that I get involved in, they become, the economic value becomes the thing that is easiest to measure and easiest. It's something that we buy into that when we don't offer other alternatives to how the value is measured.
But our core as museum and gallery workers is telling stories that are interesting and easy to understand with visuals.
Yeah.
So we should be really easy to talk to as far as wonderful things and get politicians excited.
Yeah.
I think that
Treasury officials too. No, but I think it's more vital than ever, and I do sometimes worry that we buy into a more corporatised view, and I do know, I know that we've been encouraged to see ourselves in this focus on audiences, user-focused. I've myself been part of that. I'm responsible for that in part. We have sort of individualised our impact on visitors. This thing does this thing for you, rather than this great experience creates something for us. And it's an interesting challenge. But anyway, I digress, as always.
Can I bring Craig in as a curator in a large institution about how we'll get to your sort of personal journey in a minute, but I wanted to ask you about AMaGA and how it's worked for you around, or how you see it in terms of representation of the particular subsets that exist in the museum and gallery sector.
Yeah, and I was reflecting on this earlier today as well in terms of my work history, having started in South Australia and moving to a national context, and my understanding of the many and varied roles of AMaGA have shifted as well from, the need for peer support and connection in really, smaller contexts to the important role of advocacy. I work for the federal government, and so bound by lots of codes of conduct. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but there's lots of, things that, sectorally you might want to march down the street about. But as a senior curator at the National Museum of Australia, I also have to walk an institutional line as someone who is known in the sector, who is known more widely, and then how I navigate that. And I see the role of AMaGA in taking a lead on that advocacy is really important. But to go back to something that Seb said before about, the reasons, the sort of challenge between being an individual working for an institution and then being on the AMaGA committee. I think for me, this is maybe more broader in my life experience, like lived experience is important. And if you can use lived experience to then think more about community, think more about a bigger picture, it's actually much more powerful. And so I do that in my life every day as a queer person. And so I do that, right? So then it makes sense to me to do it in my work and professional context. And so coming to the AMaGA board, it's not about the National Museum of Australia. It's what I think, my experiences across different contexts and, how I've grown with AMaGA can then influence a bigger picture.
And just to unpack a little bit more in terms of AMaGA and its capacity to deal with specific special interest groups, as they used to be officially known, but now sort of national networks of particular expertise or interest. What would be, this outgoing council's perspective on how we might, help or support and connect the people who, have common interest, but also not take away from the broader agenda of advocating for the sector as a whole?
It does go back to volunteering as well, right? I think, if we believe in the value proposition of an association like AMaGA, we can't just tell AMaGA to do it. It's about contributing, and contributing takes lots of forms. And if you're privileged and able to volunteer, and you believe in AMaGA, you should do that. You would do that in many, many other contexts. And so if you believe in the social value of museums, the civic value, all of that stuff, it's about getting together and having a conversation about whatever that interest is or network group, and not waiting for an under-resourced team to create the scaffolding, right? And so how can we create that scaffolding together? And then it's applying the logic of what advocacy is trying to do to connect the sector to, and then leading by embodying those values.
I'd say that that it's also important that the scaffolding is scaffolding for the same bigger building, let's say, because I think one of the things that is certainly the case in community organising and in social change practices at the moment is fragmentation that is playing out across many concerns right now. And I think part of that is that we lost the ability to have a commonality of purpose and be able to disagree on some things but agree on other things to move particular issues forward. And that's where I think AMaGA has a great role in stitching together specific interests in service of a bigger cause. And I think that's something that has been slightly unexpected. I think it is one of the effects of the pandemic. I would suggest us being locked down or communicating only through screens for, in some cases, a very long period of time, but in other cases, a lesser period of time. There are cultural effects of us still now having to relearn how to work together towards a common end. And I think that's something, certainly as a parent of, just above teenagers now, that sort of anxiousness about how to get on with others is something that museums have a unique role in doing, but I think that's sort of that piece around how to work together while disagreeing about some things. I feel like at a time when evidence and in quotes, fact is being undermined and intentionally, but also through specific design choices in our culture and society. The evidentiary nature of museums is absolutely vital to many other institutions that make a civic society. And so that sort of thing is also really important for us to remember, that museums are part of making a civil society work. And those special interest groups and specific, be it you have specialisations in digital media or in paper conservation, they're in service of a bigger thing. They're not just paper conservators sharing practice. We share practice because conserving paper matters, because it helps create evidence for those things being from a particular period of time, rather than the flatness of an always, in quotes, accessible digital world, which is something, I think really matters now, politically and socially.
But the polarisation, I think that I've learnt more from difference and from mistakes than I ever have from people exactly like me.
Oh yeah,
and I think
totally.
that that's one thing about AMaGA, and it brings together everybody despite specialisations, despite hierarchies, for that common overall goal. And I think that's why I always, there's power in the union. It feels like you're going to learn something and you're discovering something new. So we're almost providing that thing that museums and galleries provide, but in that larger national context. So it always makes me excited when that kind of stuff comes. I love it when people do something unexpected or challenging or that kind of thing. And I think that that's what AMaGA can do, and it can provide those special knowledge areas and support that. But as a national council, it's looking a lot at the whole.
So just knitting two aspects of what you've just said together, Julie, I'd really like to dig a bit deeper around that idea about when you joined the staff of a museum, you felt compelled, like it was a non-optional to be part of AMaGA. How can we cultivate that in the rest of the sector? What was it that
force people to join AMaGA? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, like mandate it. No, but I'm very serious, because it picks up on what Craig said about volunteering. We are nothing without that sort of support, yet the statistics from Volunteering Australia are quite dire around volunteering and the decline post-pandemic. And it's not unique to Australia, it's across all first world countries, and all volunteer contributions, not only in the arts and culture.
I think really what AMaGA needs to do is offer opportunities for real connection. And connection was the one word that kept coming up all through the meeting today. And that sense of connection for building careers for isolated or emerging, connecting different sectors, connecting different states. And really, it's the one place that you can do that. And so I can't see why people wouldn't want to. And it's that level of you can give as much. So connection, the other word, capacity, and of course, glorious civilizations, that I can't try and work out how that fits in right now. But
I think it does.
That idea of being conscious that people can give different things at different times, different parts of their life, and AMaGA will still be there. So there's been times when I've been very engaged with AMaGA. There's times where I've had to pull back. I took on that vice presidency gig when I was a director of a museum, and then by now I've got 10 libraries and archives, a childcare centre, a fort, and now a visitor information centre in the past week. So,
it keeps coming.
It just keeps coming. And I think the thing that makes me keep contributing to AMaGA is it's almost a community sense. So I can go to an AMaGA event and I will run into people I haven't seen for years. I will hear something that makes me want to go back to work. I can be inspired. And I think that sometimes that emotional side, that community family building side of AMaGA gives us the power to tell the stories on that national advocacy stage.
Yeah.
Because we are one.
Are we declaring ourselves a union at this point? No. I think that that's, again, borne out by the fact that there was genuine disappointment throughout the sector about us not having the capacity to do a conference in 2025. And I think it's just for the council. I mean, I sit and reflect on what the council deliberations are across today's meeting. And, you know, it without a doubt, like, that is AMaGA. Like, being a forum is our core purpose, and that brings the connection, that brings a gathering that's both accessible, i.e., you know, it will likely always be hybrid, but it is the thing, it's the how that's the challenge on lots of levels. But yeah, I think that's been reinforced for incoming council and for the membership. Like, I'm really missing the council. The conference. We should be having a conference right now. Instead, we've got this excellent event, but it's nothing. It's not even a conference's toenail. Sorry, guys. Okay, so
More questions.
more questions. Well, we've touched on actually quite a few of your 6 points already. So let's throw it out there.
Sure, why not?
Has someone got a roving mic?
There's
Excellent,
definitely a roving mic.
excellent. And if there's any questions from our audience online, please send them through on the chat, and our support team will see that and share the question.
Thanks to the panel. Seb, coming to your first point about research, and also when you put up point 3 and then the slide from the V&A about this all belongs to you.
Yeah.
My mind goes to, in my work with Questacon, you know, and holding citizen science projects. Now, I know each of you has done various iterations of engaging the public in contributing to either research or a topic. You can have wonderful things come in. You can be swamped by the volume of information you get. So community engagement and involvement, help or hindrance?
I think it's part of the social contract. I think what we need to be clear on is that at this moment in history and time, undermining of expertise and the craft and skills and labour that goes into evidentiary work is there is a political movement to remove the value of expertise in decision making. And so I think part of citizen science's value is engaging people in the practice and building trust in research practices. And I think for museums, a lot of museums have reduced their research efforts and have also, the research infrastructure within Australia has been diminished. Our university sector is going through all sorts of challenges now. At the very moment that we need more of that, and Australia, when I'll speak in a national sense, definitely needs to become, what we've always been saying, is become more of a knowledge economy and move out of digging stuff out, digging a few things out of the ground and being more specific about the things we dig out of the ground to service the needs of our economy going forward. But I do feel like it's very rare for museums to be part of the awarding of Australian Research Council grants. That hasn't maintained pace, and our collections in some major institutions are no longer the focus of what they do, and that is sometimes a choice, but I feel it's a dangerous choice because it separates museums with collections who have a responsibility for that from the thing that makes them different from everything else. There are lots of other places where community events can happen. There are lots of other places where socially engaged art practices can happen. There's lots and lots of places to have festivals. There are not many places that preserve evidence of the past. And, it was interesting, but, one of the reasons that's come up, so, I brought that up today. I was coming from China. I was in China for literally 4 days, right? So the Palace Museum's digitised their entire collection, 3D scanning, all this crazy stuff. They're releasing all of that, and it's very clear what that is for. It is super clear what kind of that is for when you're there. And of course, they get something like 15 million visitors a year to the Forbidden City. That could just be a tourist attraction, but no, they've digitised all this stuff. They've scanned all this stuff. They're doing, there was a big focus on research, which I think we shouldn't neglect, because it is our point of difference. And I know there are people in this room who have been part of ARC bids and many other things. I've been part of them as well. We all are when we can. But I do feel that there needs to be more discussion of how do we do that and how do we argue for the value of that. And that is not just a museum's problem. That is a humanities problem. It's a sciences problem as well. And it's not just about science communication. It's about, because we need to be doing the primary research too. And I feel like when I started off in museums, I was at the Powerhouse, for the first 10 years or so of my career. There was so much research with those collections going on. But post-COVID, I feel like there is far less of that. And yet there is still this big vibe in the sector of digitisation is a good thing, a necessary thing, but for what purpose? If we're not going to do research, simply seeing images of things on screens at higher and higher resolution is, I would suggest, is a little bit like having all the music you want on Spotify at the at the press of a button, which has been terrible for musicians and for appreciation of the specifics of specific music. It's been great for music for your run, for your workout at the gym, for your dinner party, but it hasn't brought any attention to the specifics of particular creators, songs, and it's flattened the historical context of the production of music. And I worry that I don't want museum collections to become part of the soup of images that we circulate in, if there is no other purpose to them. So that's my, being someone who's been deeply involved in digitisation and making interfaces for exploring collections and all that stuff for 25 years. It is my warning to the sector: don't become wallpaper, because it's a big risk.
And I think it's actually one of the things that I see our industry doing really well is hiding their work.
Yeah.
So we, sail through, we expect our visitors to come and see the glorious finished product and not know how it got there. And I think that as an industry, we need to be bold enough to lift up our skirts and show our petticoats. We need to build people who are museum literate, not just as visitors, but who understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. That it's not just a thing that you come and consume and you walk through and you go, that they're actively part. And that citizen science movement really is about getting people, I think, to understand the process, to look critically, to analyse, to understand the bias that is within research and how you choose what is real and what is made up. And I think that's something that science centres, museums, galleries, botanical gardens, all these things, if we show our work, we show our value and we show our worth, but we also create the next generation of people doing this job. And I think that
It's
expose your underbelly.
It's labour and craft. At the heart of this is showing the human labour that goes into doing things, particularly at a period where automation is, scaling at pace, and the specifics of craft really, really matter. So one of the things so I don't know if you went to see the Game World's exhibition on our lower ground floor. As an AMaGA member, if you show your card, you'll get free access, right? So for our paid exhibitions, we took a tour of donors through as that exhibition was in its final weeks of being built, and it was the first time we'd shown the exhibition process being built. And I'd say in kind of internally there were two things. One was like, do we really want to show an unfinished thing? People are going to have to wear hard hats. They're going to see all the messy cables. There's not going to be any labels up. Yeah, the objects are not even in there yet. Some of the screens aren't even in place. There's, masking tape on things, blah, 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 blah. So that was fine. We kind of were like, that could be interesting. The second one was, do donors really want to see that? Do they really want to hear the stories of how much it costs to make or how many hours it takes to build this thing? Turns out that was an incredibly popular donor event. Everyone loved it and understood that's where my money's going. Like, it's actually going into paying those people who are working overtime to lay the cables and get this to work. And then when they come back to see the finished exhibition, they're even more impressed because they've seen how it's gone. And we take that further here. So one of the things we've been doing a lot of work with artists and creators is when we will show works or commission a work by an artist and you'll see this in game worlds too. We actually work with those artists to show their process, because we say to them, like, it's great that you made this thing, but actually the thing that's going to engage people around it is understanding how you made the thing. And I know you might have had to cut kind of corners, or you did this and this and this, but actually that's interesting. And then that provokes a question of, why did you do that? And that's the question at all of this. So, I do feel that there's great practices going on across our sector, but they're unevenly paced, and I think the uneven effect of that is that there is a lowering of appreciation of human labour and human craft at a time where that is absolutely vital, and museums matter in that story. And museums matter also in historically drawing connections across time in those things. That's, Katie and I, you did hint at this. We have this back and forth banter about the value of art museums. I love art museums. I just wish they would show process more.
Yep.
Because it is not about fancy things or beautiful things. It's about how humans made those things and why humans value those things and don't value some other things. And it's about unpicking hierarchies of taste and how taste is relational and cultural and all these sort of things, right? So I feel like, back to the research bit, I think museums are great opportunities for research, but that requires working with humanities researchers and the tertiary sector and the research sector and the science sector in different ways. Museums don't need to be the subject of research. They can be active participants in research, and that's where I think there needs to be a step change in how the sector engages in research applications and these sorts of things, and be part of those dialogues with the humanities and science to build an appreciation of that within our culture and community.
Yeah. It's about appreciation, not perfection. Like, a citizen scientist is never going to be as amazing as your entomologist who's studied for so many years, and you might get a whole lot of crap out of it, but they're part of the family, they know what you do, and they're part of the conversation, and that builds engagement.
Yep.
I was just going to basically say what Seb just said, actually, that it's about redefining what museum research is. Research, I think when most people hear that, they think of an academic, they think of an ARC, they think of...
Academics are cool.
Yeah, academics are cool, but we don't have to be
answer their
them
questions with our collection.
because what we do, what we produce, what we make, with or without an ARC project, with or without an academic, is research. And it's about redefining what that big research means and how we contribute to that with or without the academy, because we're not trying to be the academy. I think it goes back to, people think they have to produce a paper or they have to do a conference presentation. That's not necessarily the case. And I think AMaGA has a role in advocating for those kinds of redefinitions as well. And I think that's really important to consider here. What does it actually mean? What are we actually saying when we say research?
But Craig, your day job is really about presenting the museum and bringing other voices into the museum through those platforms that have the potential to make us irrelevant. But can you tell us more about how that's going? What people who have come to the National Museum through a social media project, how do they expect us to have the last word as an authoritative institution?
Well, I guess it depends who you are. That's a contextual question, right?
Yeah.
Some people would absolutely expect the
It's
National
spiky
Museum
now.
of Australia to have the last word, as do many journalists. But I think when Pete was talking about the citizen science stuff, I think about a project that I led called Momentous, which was about bringing together stories from the pandemic and the 2019-2020 bushfire seasons together and ask Australians to consider profound change in their own life. And that was a curatorial proposition put out to seek response. And so we weren't writing the posts, we weren't picking the photographs, but we still framed it within a curatorial question, right? On the face, it was like, tell us your COVID story, tell us your bushfire story. But what we're reflecting on is change in our lives, in our communities, in our world. And when you look at those 300 posts that came through, you can see that, right? And that then becomes a research tool, a record of something, not just individual posts, but of a collective subset of experience that could potentially be generalised to document something about Australians at a moment in time. I think that's where value can be created through screens, through social media, through all of that stuff. But it is the question of why and how, what for.
I would love to see an extension of that project that, say, was working with QUT's Internet Observatory that harvested, that has access to social media feeds, so it's not solicited. It's actually a full survey of everything published in Australia during the pandemic on public platforms, because I think that would tell another story. And then, I think this is the other piece around building an evidence base that allows other stories for other outcomes to be achieved. And I think that's one of the things where some of the really great ideas in museums like Momentous, in working with the Academy, can actually scale those to a size where they become more than a museum exhibition, and they have impact across broader politics and other things. You know, there's a lot of work going on in disinformation and misinformation at kind of the moment. And, you know, this museum's part of the Australian Media Literacy Alliance. You know, I think as is the NFSA and the ABC and others, and I just sometimes feel like there are these untapped things that allow the broader conversations we need to be having as a society about trust and about expertise and about where we want our communities to head, that museums need to step into.
I think
And they need to step in with other people, though. They can't just step in by themselves.
Yeah, totally.
That's my thing.
I think that's interesting. The Ad Observatory is a super interesting project, right? But it's massive data sets. And so how, like, my thing is, like, you need to do multiple things because museums at their heart, social history museums in my case, use objects to tell personal stories that can be blown up, right? To say something bigger. You can do that with the social media. You can do that with the digital cultural object. And I think, you know, that is still a unique role of museums to engage in big picture histories, but through a small subset of objects. We're not an archive. We're not trying to be comprehensive. And I think
Should a museum work with an archive that is doing that, though? Like, I guess that's the sort of new opportunity in this century, is that what the object is, or what the material of the museum is becoming data-fied as well. I mean, you know, one of the talks at the symposium in China was from one of the tech companies, AMAP, which I guess is the Google Maps of China. And they were showing how they were working with the Palace Museum using 5G, which makes Wi-Fi and connectivity pervasive throughout the entirety of the 60,000 plus massive multi-block footprint of the palace. And they were able to track visitors at scale through the building, and they were using the same algorithms that they were using for traffic flow routing when you try to navigate from one part of the city to the other, to have predictive analytics on where the 10 million plus visitors were going to go next in the Palace Museum. I just wonder whether, you know, that sort of, like, we're in an age where, you know, you're being served ads that are auctioned on a millisecond basis out of your control and consent. We're not seeing ways that museums are able to scale up what the materiality of their collection is around that sort of stuff too. So what the artefacts of what Australians, in quotes, did were collected by the NMA over the past decades. What the artefacts of what Australians do right now are better known by a multiplicity of ad kind of tech platforms than they are by the National Museum, or in my case, the screen habits of Australians are better known by ad platforms and by us ourselves. So it's some interesting things, interesting challenges for the future, and I think that can only come through partnerships with the Academy, because those skill sets are incredibly specialised. But I do feel those are also great opportunities for us, not just so we can predict traffic flow better. I mean, that's kind of
very useful.
Well, it could be, but 10 million visitors to either of our museums would be a nightmare.
We've got a question from the floor.
Hello again. This is building on what you've been talking about. It's been something that's been concerning me in the sector, which is about AI and LLMs, and the critical role of AMaGA in researching and advocating for how it's one of the biggest challenges and biggest opportunities, I think, for society and for this sector. How do we deal with LLM? How do we deal with AI? What do we do? It's discussed often at Glam Peak. The National Library is doing really interesting stuff and challenging stuff with that. We've got, Julie, you've talked about and said the fact that a critical part of the museums is their authenticity and the trust, and that will be gold, absolutely gold, as people get more confused by what they see on screens and what is coming around. It's really difficult, getting more and more difficult to believe what you see or what you hear. You have museums who actually have that trust and that authenticity. So how can you parlay that, and what is AMaGA going to do? This is one of the biggest things that I think that our sector advocate organisation, I would love to see focusing on, certainly something that ICOM will be focusing on. We've got the ICOM Triennial coming up in Dubai in November, which is, all the museums of the world, and part of that membership organisation will be tackling stuff like this. It's been great hearing you, because I'll be there representing Australian National Committee, but I really want to know what you guys and what this organisation is going to be doing in that space.
So I was representing AMaGA on the Attorney General's discussions about AI and copyright earlier on. And, being someone who's worked in that space, and we do stuff with AI tools here. You can search our collection by content within films and all sorts of other things live. So we've been hands on the tools here for a long time. And obviously it's that was part of what I've been interested in for a long period of time. I think, the challenging thing with LLMs and AI at the moment is the fear of missing out driving policy making, and the issues around policy making in a small population with a very small economy that, whilst we have a very educated public in terms of tertiary education and comparative, I guess, scientific literacies, our population is really small, and our investment and investment scale is tiny. And so there's a lot of discussions around, in a couple of years ago, there was a lot of discussion about data sovereignty and Australian sovereign AI and these kinds of things. The NFSA was doing a project to have transcription tools that could decipher an Australian accent, these sorts of things. These things are incredibly expensive. They have questionable public value, let's say. At the same time, we also know that the companies that have been able to popularise these, and I think the big turning point was when OpenAI made Chat kind of GPT public access without any consultation or actually thought. I happened to visit OpenAI as part of a Museums of Tomorrow round kind of table in 2023, just after they'd done that. In San Francisco, and me and many other museum directors, art museums were actually the primary directors there. But anyway, very important. And we sat down with OpenAI, and the person we met with, who was their nominated sector engagement person. OpenAI at that time was quite small. Was also their marketing person, a bunch of other things. They didn't really have any idea about what museums did. And there was a big thought of, well, we could get all the art museum information into these systems so they could be trained better and they could tell us the truthy things, literally. And there was not an understanding that the point of these systems is not necessarily to give you factual answers or evidentially based answers. At that point, those tools were very, very much about giving the average response from their training kind of data. So there were these questions about, could museums, like others, license their collections for money to these platforms? I think that's moved on. I think that moment has passed, and many of our collections have already been harvested as part of harvesting the internet at large. so it now becomes a question of how do museums and galleries work with the public to help them understand the limitations, but also the opportunities with these systems, and be careful about how we apply them in our own work, and how we, I do strongly believe that as visual information and text information becomes less able to be trusted in its vibey sense of the word, the desire for evidence actually increases, but that will take a couple of years. A little bit like we've seen a bit of a pushback from younger folks away from screens towards more physical media. So I think we're in a moment where we don't want to over. I often say to people, the way technology is financed is through, as I said, when I had my computer crash, fake crash, is based on these dreams of what digital technology can do or might do. That's how you get venture capital to invest in your startup. They very rarely do those things. And when we have responses to these technologies as if they already can do the things they promise, we're giving too much of our agency to these, what are effectively financial speculation. And so, I think the sector needs to take a cautious approach and again be clear about what it is that the sector has and does well. And sometimes that's moved away from, the physical stuff or the evidentiary stuff. So yeah, I'd be. I'm always curious when professional organisations, AMaGA, ICOM, and many others, jump into new technology things without having hands on the tools. I think it's really important to understand the grain of media, and I think with social media we saw the same thing. I think, I certainly was part of the early wave. I still get a paper that Linda Kelly, Angelina Russo, Jerry Watkins and I co-author. I get that stupid alert from academia.edu or whatever. Your thing has been cited for the 50 billionth time or whatever. It's like from 2008, people. Stop citing it. It's terrible. The world's moved on, right? So this sort of thing of like these technologies move at pace, and the way the economic structures of those companies is based on promises. And so we need to be careful of giving those promises too much reality. Transformational technologies. I remember when people were talking about NFTs, like seriously. Sensible ones was like, it's kind of a bit of a scam, right? But anyway, AI's, LLMs, I'm worried about the cultural effects of these things. I'm very worried about the broader cultural effects. And when we... Yeah. Yeah.
How's AMaGA going to parlay its incredible authenticity and reservoirs of trust, some of the most trusted institutions in the country, museums, and AMaGA as the national representative? How are you going to we should be using that for the good of society as a whole in terms of combating rising tides of misinformation and disinformation and what we don't believe. That's really what I'm looking at.
I agree, and I think, but I think we also need to be careful that we don't assume that trust comes across for everything. I think we are trusted on some things, and not necessarily we assume trust on other things where we might not have that trust. And I think part of that is it comes down to how we engage with visitors and how they perceive what we are there for. Because I think museums are trusted is a nice question to ask in a broad population survey, but we also know that large portions of the population like the idea of museums existing, but have a very particular idea of what a museum is, which might not be what the museums we can go visit today actually are. So I'm always a bit cautious about that kind of research. It's a bit like in the library sector, very high valuing of the public library, and your neighbours will go out and protest if the council tries to shut it down. Do they actually visit and use it? Not at that particular moment in their life stage. So they do when they're seeking a job, they've come in as a new migrants, they perhaps have young kind of children, or they're a retiree. But the perception of what a library is trapped in the last time you visited it, possibly. So I'd caution the research around assuming that museums have this license and trust, when sometimes the activities we do might not necessarily be representative of that. But I'm not, we don't want to be Luddites. Luddites were actually really, really good, and I think Luddites have been poorly named, have been defamed. Luddites were a Labor movement worried about the effects of technology on labour and wages. And they were totally correct about that. They were not anti-tech, they were anti the effects of tech on labour.
And it shouldn't be a pejorative term.
No, that's right.
Yep.
This is probably a bit more museums and practical and curatorial, but the fake stuff is real too. And the fact that we're having a conversation about AI and its impact on society means it's worthy of collection for me. And I think I always think about that. I forget which royal it was that put up the family photo that had been edited, right? And then it went crazy on social media. Yeah. That would be interesting to collect as a series of posts and responses and reactions from social media using AI. And if well documented in a museum context, could actually be used to say something interesting, which would then also do this conversation, but at a different level, not just to policymakers and government and tech companies, but like the people, right? The people walking through the doors who haven't even thought about it. Like, oh, wait, actually 80% of what's being circled around social media is AI. Like, whatever it may be, whatever. That's a fake statistic, don't quote me.
Slop curation, slop curator.
But, you collect the ugly stuff, collect the fake stuff, collect and talk about it. We're not just collecting the most treasured, the most precious. That you were talking about the Chinese museum sector and the focus on treasure and all that stuff. Like Australian museums, have moved on from that, and so we should be collecting the other stuff.
It's that piece about how do you communicate the value of why you're collecting it that is the bit that I think we need to get better at, because I totally agree. I mean, we collect social media. There's social media memes in our permanent galleries that update every month or so, and it's interesting the way people come and recognise those things. We had a brain rot one the other month, and it was interesting seeing families come in and say, oh, you used to look at those, but it's actually about, well, okay, the recognition of that, but then how do we have interpretation that doesn't require them to necessarily just read the label? Because we know that very few of them will read the label. So how do you build an exhibition that interrogates slop or brain rot content better than, say, the fabulous Instagram accounts that do that already quite well? Or that, crisis acting as an Instagram account is probably the best one on Instagram at the moment, that captures the global world of shared internet content and curates them into these beautiful 20 video sets. Crisis Acting is a Canadian artist who's doing this, and actually totally amazing. And there are a number of people who are doing this, and I sometimes worry that museums are not in that space, right? And should museums be in that space? I totally agree. How do we get to that, and what is it about culture that we value? Or what about culture are you making? And a contemporary social history curator should entirely be working in media and circulation of mimetic images and these sorts of things.
Can I pull it back to a really boring bit?
Do you want to take that question as the incoming?
Yeah, I kind of want to take it back to a little bit
The call to
a little bit practical.
us with our vast resources.
We're practical. Craig and I are practical.
Very
Come
sorry.
on.
Two beautiful brain boxes on either side of me. And I guess it also doubles right back to that initial question about capacity. And it's about we're a membership organisation. We've got so much capacity. We're voluntary. And what are our battles? And I think AMaGA needs to work better as part of that larger organic infrastructure around us, and to work out what our challenges and what our battles are as based on what our members are saying. So, you know, I think from my perspective, you know, as soon as you ask that question and these guys started riffing on AI and how, like, all these wonderful things, my thought was, well, somebody's got this. Do we need to step into this space? Is this what the majority of people are saying? Or, you know, or is this something that Glam Peak is leading the way on? It's all right sometimes for AMaGA to not. And I think that that's really hard for us to do because, you know, we think of ourselves as the voice, but there's a lot of voices in our space. And so, you know, some of the great work that SACS has been doing on employment in the arts and training in the arts, and some of the great stuff that NAVA's been doing as well, and some of the other stuff that Archer's been doing around, you know, Aboriginal curation and creating community, and some of the stuff that ICOM's doing on the international stage in Glam Peak. Sometimes we can't do everything, and that sounds like a cop-out.
No, it's fine.
But I think it's one of those ones that, I guess from an incoming president's perspective and that national council, we're supposed to reflect the industry and who else is doing what. So there's some things that we probably won't be able to take a voice on, and then there's some things that it's totally in our wheelhouse and we've got to jump in on, and it's about sometimes choosing those battles, which is really hard. And so after all this amazing stuff about culture, I'm just going, it depends if we have capacity, which doesn't sound as exciting as what you guys are saying.
I think it's about being part of an ecology. What you're saying is be part of the ecology.
And I think that we need to do that. And I think sometimes we need to make space for other voices. So, you know, from my perspective, First Nations first means that if there's a First Nations organisation that wants to speak, we step back sometimes and we provide them support. It's not, you know, it's about giving them air and agency sometimes. So yeah, mine's probably a little less.
No, totally agree.
We've got 10 more minutes.
Wow, that went
these brain boxes.
Lucky I did keep it short, eh?
In our leadership. And, you know, Seb's 6 areas. Can I get a sense whether, basically in this last 10 minutes, we want to tackle infrastructure or training?
Oh, questions from the internet.
Not yet.
Hello.
There we go, yes.
Sorry. Yes, there have been some questions in the chat. We've got one question from Alana Part that says, Remix talks a lot about the experience economy and often position immersive digital experiences as being the next evolution for museums and galleries. So much so that Remix Perth, London's The Young VA's focus on tactile experiences was seen as countercultural. And Alana is curious on what the panel's thoughts on this might be.
I think I'm cool. All good. Cool. See ya.
Thank you.
See ya. I think it's a real worry that we try to mimic commercial enterprises that are doing immersive experiential experiences. I think those are excellent and do their thing well. They are not
we need to be clear that we are not them, and we need to be clear why, because if we don't, we will be expected to have the same financing model as they do, and we cannot, and we often will have commitments to other responsibilities that we need to do, see also collections. I think of course there are lots of things we can learn from some of their practices, but I think, this is where I might disagree with Remix, and I think the rhetoric around the experience economy actually dates back to 1992, and you know, I kind of was the first chief experience officer in the museum sector when I moved here in 2015, and it was kind of a bit of I was kind of trying to poke at this a little bit, and I've abolished that position here now. Right? Because I think obviously we make design and make experiences. Obviously all museums can pitch themselves as doing that. But then who are you pitching yourselves as your sector you are part of, and the value you create? And I think that is something that reduces our difference and reduces our ability to make a very clear value proposition to the community and to the public, who do need to finance the work that museums do. Public money does need to fund things, because otherwise you will only get the culture that is able to be funded commercially or by venture capital or private equity. We need publicly financed culture, and we need to be very clear that that is different from things that can be commercial. It is the same reason we might fund specific types of filmmaking or particular art practices, or literary journals need funding because they are not meant to be able to be supported by their readers. So we need to be careful about not buying into the corporatisation of culture or neoliberal economics. It's not user pays, and it shouldn't be. And I worry about the experience economy effect on our sector in that regard, particularly for those who are new to the sector, who don't have the history of immersive experiences that dates back to the Lascaux caves, you know, like seriously, like, you know. So anyway, so funding models, that's differentiation. AMaGA needs to be clear why museums are not the same as insert commercial experience or commercial interactive experience, or whatever you want to say. Museums are different from those. They might share some similarities at times, but they are different. And if we don't say they are different, we will be lumped in with them to our detriment.
Can I draw a really long bow from the Lascaux caves to tax reform? And I bet no one in this room expected me to say that. At the tax reform summit, there was, proposals from all of the arts, but one of them that was most interesting was about an idea that came from our sector around taxing entirely international import exhibitions at a different rate to Australian created content in our context.
Well, it sounds like tariffs there, Katie, doesn't
Call
it?
me Trump. No.
Cultural tariffs. That sounds very French. No, it does. I mean, this is what the French film industry has done. You know that.
Yeah. So is that a way that the door is open for tax reform that benefits our sector? Is that wholesale import of whether it be let's throw it out there, Van Gogh alive, or those things.
Okay, I think we gain a lot from international exposure and trade and migration and understanding how other cultures think of the world and all these things. That internationalism is super important. At the same time, we do need to say that the public purse is not big enough to fund the kinds of publicly funded services, be them education, health, welfare, defence, police, culture and the arts, to the standard that the public expects them to be at. So tax reform needs to happen to grow the public purse to do that, and so you need to attract that from somewhere. You need to get that money from somewhere, or we all agree that museums will deliver less lavish things that the public might desire. We meet fewer user needs because we can't afford to deliver them to the standard that, say, a venture capital funded project that is museum-like can. So there are some things around expectation, and there are some things around public expectation of quality being out of step with the fiscal realities of the operating environments we're in. Yep. And so tax reform is key to helping that happen. Should we apply tariffs to imported exhibitions? I mean, I think Craig has a big Korean exhibition coming in, which is coming in from a UK institution, and I think was largely financed by the Korean government as part of a soft power initiative that they've been doing for many decades now. There are really important things that happen as a result of those things, and what isn't clear necessarily to the public is who's paying for these things. So I think one of the things that, I think, and I said this in my thing, the social contract is about being clear about things cost money, particularly if you want workers to be paid well. If you want your hospitals to deliver excellent quality health care, you need really well paid hospital workers, and you need a tax base that enables that to happen. Culture is no different, and choices need to be made. At the same time, as soon as we start putting cultural tariffs on things, we should expect that other nations will get upset about that, and so then it becomes a question of that international trade relations. Which is above my pay grade, but no, it's actually a really important part of that. Well, I think these are sort of dialogues that I would hope ICOM is very much part of, and AMaGA might have a voice for ensuring that museum workers in Australia are paid at good above award rates based on their craft and skill. Yeah.
And I think that speaks to also that national cultural infrastructure piece, which I know is, important to AMaGA. And
this is why I get into trouble, Katie.
Yeah, I know,
trouble on this
because
stuff.
I have to get you into trouble at the end. You're
do
about
that.
to walk off the AMaGA Council, but your experience
Still working in a
around
museum.
Yes, I know. So as I said, it's the Hotel California. You're not actually leaving, but your experience and in the earlier large, projects to bring together, the aggregate national collections, they all had a great start. Where are they now? Should we be advocating for the same but different? Is national cultural infrastructure or aggregated national collections that isn't Trove, but is museum and gallery collection specific, is that something AMaGA should advocate for? Is it something that's even possible? There you go. That's my final provocation to you, Seb Chan.
I was thinking shared cultural infrastructure was also sharing buildings and other things.
Shared storage.
Different ways of
Would you like to
organising
come up
ourselves.
and talk about shared storage?
Look, I think, I think the things that the sector needs is different across different parts of the sector, but there are some very common threads throughout, no matter where I talk to people. There are lots of issues around storage, and some governments are making initiatives to do those things. There are still pressures around digitisation and conservation, and there are some things that can scale well. There are some institutions that are able to attract higher paying international tourist visitors for particular types of exhibitions that could be also thus using their higher revenues in certain moments to support and fund the work in regions and to develop shared solutions for common issues. There are also some very basic things that are not-for-profit collective or B corporation or others would be very sensible to have operating across our sector. For example, ticketing systems. For example, potentially collection management systems or standards-based things. There is a value in having a standards-based approach to many, many things. And then once you have that, then you can scale things on top of that and make lots and lots of efficiencies that can redirect money into things that are not able to be standardized. For example, storytelling. No one wants standardized storytelling. But we might want standardized object classifications in order to enable cross-institutional storytelling, and many other things, and loans and all of this sort of stuff. So I do feel there is a bit of a moment now, and we'll see this over the next decade also as the climate and energy transition work really, I can't believe I'm going to say that, heats up. But you know, there will be increasing pressure on the financial realities of institutions, and I think there is a big need for institutions to be seeing themselves as part of local or regional collectives in order to share staff, knowledge and resource, and sometimes that will be digital infrastructure, other times it will be services. I mean, here in the Melbourne Arts Precinct, security and cleaning, these sorts of things are things that are becoming shared contract, and that's complicated. But actually, there are some services that might make a lot of sense to do in a unified way. There are other things where that is not very good at all. But I do feel, being someone who runs a museum, that finding ways to make better, more well-articulated claims for more competitive public money is very important, and also finding ways to share that to bring the whole sector along is better.
And I think the poor end of town has always known that, and we've always had to do that. And I think that from different perspectives, we have to stop seeing each other as competition.
Yeah, 100%.
Our competition is not the other members of AMaGA. My competition's the beach. The Australian museum's competition's the zoo.
Yeah.
Your competition is staying at home and playing the games. We have to stop thinking of that there's this finite bag of resources and we all jump in and we fight and we divide everything up and that is perfect. Yes, we demand individual voice, identity, brand, focus, storytelling, collection and narrative, but
we're the same forest. We're part of the same forest.
I know, and so certainly from, I know that amalgamation is a dirty word, but I ended up with an amalgamated institution. So we have two different brands and voice, but we have the same person doing it in different ways to reflect the needs of our audience. And, it'd be lovely to have more, but from a environmental point of view, it actually is much better that we are not duplicating and replicating these things that don't need to be.
Exactly.
This and the Alana's question online about experiences and what the museum's role and all of that makes me think about cultural statistics and how we measure success and data. And so I know there's incredible people doing some work on this in this country as well. But, if we continue to use high visitation, high income as a measure of success with no other, way to measure success or impact, then competition will still exist, and the desire to copy experiences will still exist. And so it goes back to how we sell the impact of the work and how that's a massive structural shift that needs to change in the sector, in lots of sectors, but in our sector in particular, if we don't just want to keep chasing money.
I think that's what AMaGA is quite possibly uniquely placed to do, is to argue for the value of the Australian sector within the Australian environment to Australians and Australian policymakers.
Well, what a beautiful return to your first point about research and an evidence base for the sector's work. I think that we've started a conversation here. This isn't the end. You can see that there's so much more to say. There's heaps of questions coming through online. Don't think this is the end. As we said, this is the inaugural AMaGA address. And Julie, it's also the symbolic handing of the baton. So, hand the mic. No. Poor Julie's done a lot of talking today and also had to do a lot of listening because it's been a big handover, but it's been wonderful to talk sectorally at the end of a day that's been very, very operationally focused, I think. And, you know, this conversation in 2 years' time will be completely different. Welcome, new National Council. Welcome, Julie, and we can't wait to hear your provocations in 2 years' time at the AMaGA conference, wherever it is, as you play out, however you like, the 2 years of your presidency. Congratulations. Welcome, new boss. And thank you so much, Seb, for your time on council, but
Thanks.
also for being our eyes and ears out there in the sector internationally and bringing that lens for all of our benefit. It's been extraordinary. Thank you, Craig, National Secretary, long-serving National Councillor, has to leave because of a constitutional anomaly, I would say.
No, it's
It is important that we have different voices, and AMaGA would always advocate for that. Thank you for that correction.
Thank you.
Keep doing that to me for the rest of my career.
Do we need a motion for this?
No,
Stop
let
it.
him be as well. Thank you, everyone in the audience. Thank you for supporting us, and I hope you found that provocative, interesting, and hopefully you can see where AMaGA's role is, where it can be. Keep asking the questions. Let's keep having this conversation. That's why our forums are so important. And it's not only this address, but you know, everyone's voice and everyone should be heard, and we want to provide that opportunity. So watch out for all of the announcements around AMaGA 2026. There's been a unanimous commitment to that by the new incoming as well as the outgoing, being a recommendation that AMaGA 2026 will be a full-blown AMaGA National Conference to bring the sector back together at a national scale. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for your forbearance. It's been a great hour and a half. We could talk all night, I expect, but we all need to go and have dinner. And thank you, everyone online, for staying with us, because you were probably able to eat your dinner while you were doing that, and that's okay. All right, then. Thank you, everyone. Good night.